Archbishop of Australia with the Ecumenical Order of Christ for Lord Rael. Just following up on my video from earlier. Now, as I've said, I posted a comment in response to that, and I'll start by addressing that. I should have stated in the first video that, of course, what I was saying in that video, aside from being, in my view, common sense, is still just my opinion. Every person is, whether they're looking at information about the Lord or in anything, they're welcome to make whatever choice they choose in whether they just believe without actually looking into it, do the research to confirm what's being said, or to deny it without looking at the proof. Either way, the consequences of that decision are entirely each and every person's own responsibility. Which is why I strongly encourage everyone to actually do research before denying Lord Rael, before dismissing him out of hand. As I've said previously, I was initially sceptical when I first heard of Rael, and I did several months of research trying to confirm either way. That was back 4 years ago now, almost exactly. And I could not prove him false. I completely failed. Now, at that point, I was still what I would consider an atheist. And once I had come to that conclusion that I could not deny that Christ had returned to earth as Rael, I did the first non-atheist thing I've ever done in my life. I got on my knees and I repented. And that night I went to bed, as usual, already exhausted, due to years of... When I was 14, I was diagnosed with epilepsy, and over the years I've been hospitalised on multiple occasions as a result of seizures of various intensity. And the worst of those being when I was 22, and I was in a medically induced coma for a number of weeks with a partially collapsed lung, pneumonia, what else? Multiple other health problems. Then on top of it all, my kidneys started shutting down. And with medical expertise and techniques as they were at the time, 14 years ago now, roundabout, that literally I should have died. At the time, there was no way to prevent death once a person's kidneys had shut down. And yet, I'm still here. At the time, I didn't know. I just thought I got lucky. Looking back on it now, I was protected. I have no doubt about that now. But anyway, over the years of multiple instances of seizures, I'd developed a sort of mental fog, cloudiness that made it difficult to think rapidly, I suppose is the best way I could put it. And the night that I repented, I went to bed, as I always do. Got the 4 hours of sleep that I could manage to fit in each and every night at that particular time, due to the early hour that I had to get up and go to the job I was working in. And I woke up the following morning and I felt about 10 years younger. The fog was gone. The occasional experience with tinnitus that I'd had up until that point. Admittedly, mainly from listening to too much loud music. Gone. Occasionally shows up every now and then, but doesn't last for long when it does. Sore knee. That's my left one, I think it was. As a result of the first job I ever worked in. Injured it and caused permanent damage to that, and that's almost faded to nothing now. But what I want to say, every one of us in the clergy that I know of has experienced some form of blessing, miracle, healing, or more than one of those three. Possibly multiple healings, or multiples of... I experience blessings every day. And I have no other way to describe what I'm experiencing. But for those of you who are looking for a bit more of a historical foundation that helps back up some of the topics that we discuss in the congregation, there's a man by the name of Zecharia Sitchin. I've studied a fair bit of his work over the years, and although he passed away in 2010, he left behind a lot of important information. Now, his studies centred around the civilization of Sumeria that existed in what is now Iraq. And I think Sumeria existed up until around 7,000 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And they appeared out of nowhere, literally. That's from archaeologists have described it that way. The Sumerian civilization appeared out of nowhere. Normally when they're studying archaeologists are studying the remains of a civilization, they'll expect, as they dig down deeper and deeper through the various layers, to see signs showing how a particular culture, a particular people, developed their own set of technology and things like that. And yes, even a stone-tipped spear is a piece of technology. But nothing like that with Sumeria. They just appeared out of nowhere. With architecture, irrigation, agriculture, 1,000-letter alphabet, printing presses, and numerous other things that would not be seen again until relatively modern times. Now, as Sumeria was excavated, the language was learnt by the historians by backtracking through other Middle Eastern languages that followed after. And Sitchin's own interpretation, which is one which, when compared to scripture, makes a lot of sense. I won't go into that now, not in depth anyway, but quite essentially, the Sumerian people had their history inscribed on a set of clay tablets, 7 of them, the 7 tablets of creation, they were referred to as. And they basically detailed the arrival of beings on Earth who created, for their own purposes, a creature that was called by the Sumerian people Adapa. And over time, that word eventually evolved to become Adam in modern Hebrew. Now, the Sumerian account even describes how once they got the process right, apparently it took more than one go, but once they got the process right, they put the adapa under what we might call a general anaesthetic and extracted bone marrow from a rib to get a perfect DNA sample from which they could create more like him. The whole extent of what's been covered in regard to that is very extensive. I could honestly list the correlations between what Zecharia Sitchin has uncovered and what we see in the scriptures. But I'll leave that for another video. And this is Matt Stater signing out. God bless. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, whichever's relevant where you are when you're watching this. Again, God bless.